Who are online. My name is Randy Youngblood. I serve as lead pastor, and what a joy it is to be here. I get to be with you this summer because everyone else is going on vacation. And it's like the old days. So anyway, people ask me, what's your succession plan? I say, if it doesn't matter who's in the pulpit while I'm here, it won't matter who's in the pulpit when I'm gone. And I think that's a good plan, and I think it's proven true. I've been bragging on you guys because I said, hey, last week it's evident that even though we're in the full swing of summer, people aren't taking a vacation from God. You guys are packing it out, and we got people sitting outside. I had a season-ending soccer party yesterday, and somebody had said, I'd been wanting to come try your church, so I brought him in and was telling them, and there was another family that said, yeah, we've started coming at the 7:40 service. And so I was telling them, I said, yeah, when you come at 7:40, there are seats. Later, you might have to sit outside. So it just brags. It's really about the spiritual hunger in our community right now. I want to start by asking you a question. Have you ever felt, remember what it's like ever to be an outcast? Maybe you're thinking, yeah, that was me in high school, or that's me right now with my family. I'm kind of out of step with everybody else. Or at work, when everybody goes out to lunch, they come back and realize they forgot to invite me. An outcast is someone who hears the words, God so loved the world, and says, of course he does, but what about me? Does he love me? And if that's you, you look at your situation, you can feel angry, you can feel rejected, you can feel hopeless, or maybe you just resigned yourself to not care anymore about being included. Maybe that's because of your family background or the education you didn't get, painful memories and experiences that you can't erase, failures you can't hide, or maybe you've just gotten used to it and you've just accepted that's just the way my life is going to always be. I remember when I finished Bible college looking for my first ministry. In the fall of '83, I had asked Kim's dad permission to marry her, and he said, sure, as long as you have a job. I said, no problem. I finished school in December. I would start looking for work. We were going to get married the end of May. And I was scouring the country. I remember driving up to College Corner, Ohio, begging some church to hire me. And all the while, no one would take a chance on this kid. And my hometown pastor said, I think it's because your family wasn't in ministry. People they're more afraid of taking a chance on you. He was just being honest, and he was the one who finally got me a job. The church that we got hired at in western Iowa, his uncle was an elder, so it still comes down to who you know. And if it hadn't been for that, I'd probably still be looking. But yeah, there are times you feel like an outsider, and you wonder, what will it take? I'm helpless to break in. And we all need someone who believes in us and who's willing to step up and help us belong. And we're going to see that in our story today. We're in week 2 of Significant Nobodies, and I think what I love about this is it really fits our church because we're people who aren't interested in making names for ourselves. I mean, there are people who want to make names for themselves, but when they come here, they blend in, and they're just one of us. And we want to make impact. We don't want to just ride this planet around the sun and go yeehaw and get off someday. We want to leave this place better because we're here, but not just for this life. We want to make an impact for eternity. Last week's outcast was Rahab, and God began working. She was a prostitute, still a prostitute, and the moment she declared her faith in God, and God lifted her out of that, lifted her out of her sin, and put her in his family, in the lineage of Jesus, no less. And this week, we're going to see something very similar that God has done. It's going to be really relatable when we feel like outsiders. And so this story is in the book of Ruth, and Ruth is one of 2 books of the Bible that bear the name of a woman. Esther is the other one. And I want to introduce you to the characters. Ruth chapter 1, verse 1 says, this was during the time of the judges. Now, when was that? When you look at history of the Bible, you got the first 5 books of Moses, and then you have Joshua, Judges, Ruth. And then you have 1st and 2nd Samuel, and then the kings began. So we got that period in between between the Exodus and the kings, and it's a time when the land was ruled by a series of judges. Now, the idea was that God would be their king, but they would, as we'll see later, they wanted to fit in like everyone else, and so what was special wasn't appreciated. So it was during that time, and there was a famine in the land. Now, when we look at the history of the Old Testament, what do we associate with famines? Famines were usually an act of God, not because he was angry, but because he loved people, and he was disciplining them, and a famine was created to remind them of their need for God, to look to him and change their behavior, which would allow them to be blessed. So there's a famine in the land, and a man left Bethlehem in Judah with his wife and 2 sons to stay in the territory of Moab for a while. This man's name was Elimelech, and his wife's name was Naomi. His name meant, my God is king, and her name meant pleasant. And the names of their 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, they won't be around long, so you won't need to remember them. But they were all Ephrathites, and you think, what's an Ephrathite? Well, when you look at the history, that's the clan of Judah that ended up in Bethlehem. So they didn't just come from Bethlehem, they belonged to Bethlehem. This was a key family and a key lineage from the town of Bethlehem. And so they entered the fields of Moab and settled there. Now, Moab, I won't tell you, because children are present, where it came from, but you can look it up in Genesis chapter 19, verses 30 to 38. And just like most thorns in the sides of the Israelites, their origin came from sin. And so the Moabites and the Ammonites had a similar beginning, and they were both thorns in the flesh. And they were people that were outside the nation of Israel, opposed to the Lord their God. And they were among those others. This is why they always said, get your marry spouses from within Israel, because other places, other people serve other gods, and they will lead your hearts astray, as we'll see later with King Solomon. So, this is where it picks up. So they went to Moab, and Elimelech died, which is really symbolic. My God is king, and there was no king in Israel in those days, and my God is king. Elimelech died and left Naomi with her 2 sons. And so they married Moabite women, which is usually a big no-no, and it's because they will lead your hearts astray to serve other gods. One of the wives was named Orpah. Sounds like something from my big fat Greek wedding. And the second was named Ruth. And so this was a time when everyone did what was right in their own eyes, and instead of seeking God during the famine, they thought it was a good idea to head out of town. And so they lived there 10 years, and it sounds like very shortly Elimelech died, but she still had her sons to support her, and then they died too. And all she was left with was her 2 daughters-in-law. Now, that day and age, women needed men to support them because there were not any financial benefit of being a woman in those days. And so when things got from bad to worse, it was like, oh no, what are we going to do? So she had heard that the famine was over, so she went to get her daughters-in-law to return to Judah. And so they headed out of town, and then she began to think of them, and she said, chapter 1, verse 8, each of you should go back to your mother's home. May the Lord show kindness to you as you've shown to the dead and to me, and may the Lord grant each of you rest in the house of a new husband. and she kissed them. They all wept loudly, and she went to send them on their way. And after a little bit of argument, Orpah went. Now, because she was saying, if you come back with me, you're going to be foreigners, you're going to be outsiders, you're going to be single women in a very brutal culture. Life is going to be hard, and I want to spare you that. You should go back. You're young, you can get married. There's no future for you in Israel. You would be much more likely to find husbands and have a good life if you'd go back and start over with your people. Orpah went, but then Ruth replied, and this is one of those, you've probably seen these in cards at Hallmark. Ruth replied, don't plead with me to abandon you or return and not follow you. For, and here are those words, wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. And your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Those words weren't said lightly because there was a big sacrifice that would accompany that kind of commitment. This is the point in the story that the story begins to be about Ruth. And what Ruth did when she uttered those words and made that commitment to her mother-in-law on the road back to Judah and the town of Bethlehem is she gave up hope of ever marrying again. She was going to be a Moabite in Israel. And she willingly embraced a life of forever being an outcast in a foreign land, living in total poverty and having no family to support her. That was the reality of the commitment that she was making. Ruth was a woman with so much against her. And yet, in the end of the story, where does she show up? In the genealogy of Jesus. So how does she get from point A to point B? And that's what we want to look at today. Let's look and see what we can learn, how an outcast became an insider. And so they traveled and they came to Bethlehem. And because when Naomi saw Ruth was determined, she gave up trying to talk her out of it and said, okay, girl, let's go. And she got to Bethlehem, and it says people were excited to see her. And they said, can this be Naomi? It's been over 10 years. I don't know if it's excitement or surprise, but there was and they were like, wow. And Naomi, listen to her heart. She says, don't call me Naomi. What did Naomi mean? Naomi meant pleasant. Call me Mara. For the Lord, hear this, for the Lord Almighty has made me bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has opposed me and the Almighty has afflicted me? Raw feelings can be ugly. And sometimes you just got to get the truth out. But just because those are the true feelings doesn't mean the feelings are true. But know this, that God doesn't cross his arms, turn his back, and get in a tizzy over it. His shoulders are big. And what we're going to see and what is beautiful about the song we were singing earlier is when we look back over our lives and we see the ups and downs, when we look back through the eyes of faith, we can see how the faithfulness of God was consistent. And it's because he doesn't get his feelings hurt when you're honest with him. And so Naomi was saying, God made me bitter, call me bitter. And so she went back from the territory of Moab, and she arrived at Bethlehem at the very beginning of the barley harvest. You see, regardless of how you feel about your life, when you're honest, when you look back, you can see little coincidences where God was caring for you. Things may not have been going what you felt was your way, but like that song we sang, when God is at work, things that are for his glory are for my good, and things that we wouldn't choose at the time are later something we give thanks for. If I had time, I could go through my life and just talk about all the low points. And I tell you that God has used those low points for his glory more than he's used my education and my experience. Because when we look back and we see that God is faithful in those moments, and when those moments come again, we're prepared to trust him. And so, regardless of how you feel about your life, look for the blessings of God in those little coincidences. And so they get back at the start of the barley harvest, and Ruth asks Naomi, will you let me go into the fields and gather fallen grain behind someone with whom I find favor? There were provisions in the law for poor people that those who owned fields and those who harvested them were not to go through and pick everything out, but if it fell to the ground, leave it, because the poor would be allowed to come later. I remember one time when we lived on the farm, our neighbors, who are now, this was 50 years ago, who are now a big sweet corn family in Iowa. They had done this in their field and let us come through like we're the poor people. We cleaned up and we froze corn all night long, and it was wonderful. But here it is, you go through and you appreciate the people who leave something for others. So there were provisions, but how would it work for Ruth, who is an outsider and an outcast and a foreigner? So she thought, maybe someone will have favor. I can find favor with someone. Like we said, we all need someone who will believe in us. And so Naomi said, go ahead, my daughter. So Ruth left and entered the field to gather grain behind the harvesters. This was how poor people in Israel were provided for. Ruth knew she was an outcast and didn't belong, but she had to do something. And without sons, Ruth began to take the responsibility the best she could to provide for Naomi. Now, Naomi had a relative on her husband's side who was a prominent man of noble character. His name was Boaz. She happened to be in one of his fields. He wasn't there that day, but Boaz is significant because if you've looked ahead last week, who was his mother? Boaz's mother was Rahab the prostitute that we talked about last week. Now, what we find is that he is, when we look at the timeline between Rahab, that when they crossed the Jordan into Jericho, and King David, it was quite a sizable time, broken up in relatively few generations. So that meant each person who got married and had kids, the men were getting older. And so he was very likely an old man, never married, and ladies think, oh my goodness, what, that would be fun to try to train an old dog new tricks. But he was a man of noble character. And regardless of why he wasn't married, he wasn't married, and it's quite likely he never was, because we'll see in the story he had no descendants. And so he arrives to check up on his field, and he asks, whose young woman is this? And his servant answered, she's the young Moabite woman who returned with Naomi from the territory of Moab. She asked, will you let me gather fallen grain among the bundles behind the harvesters? She didn't just presume, she asked, and they granted her permission. And they said, she came in and has been on her feet since early this morning. So Boaz went up to Ruth, and he said, listen, my daughter, don't go and gather grain in another field. Don't leave this one, but stay close here to my female servants. You can see it was in that time when there was no king and everyone did what was right, there were a lot of people whose right is wrong and whose wrong is right. He says, stay close to my female servants. Don't go to another field. I've ordered the young men not to touch you. And when you're thirsty, they will provide you drink from the jars that they have filled. Boaz's name meant strength, and he used his strength to be a protector. So Ruth's character and Boaz's kindness was evident. And it went on. He'd heard about her, evidently, because he said, everything you have done for your mother-in-law since your husband's death has been fully reported to me, how you left your father and your mother in your native land, and how you have come to a people you didn't previously know. Maybe, as God uses all things for good, the origin of his mother, Rahab, being an outcast that was brought in, as what has created the kindness and compassion in her son all these years later. And he said to Ruth, "May the Lord reward you for what you have done, and may you receive a full reward from the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge." That's what she was doing when she said, "Your God will become my God." And he, out of necessity, became a source of refuge. And God will use everything in your past if you'll allow him. And that's where sometimes Satan convincing us of our shame should never be uttered or repeated or mentioned, but always be hidden and thought of in a shameful way. God, when he redeems you, when he redeems us, we're born again. And he didn't just pay the price on the futures market for what we could do for him or for who we could become. Yes, he looks at you, he sees you as the righteousness of God. And how can you see the righteousness of God in me? It's because I see you as you will be when sin is no more. But in the meantime, he didn't just buy you, redeem you for who you'll be and the benefit you'll be. He bought it all. And his intention, as we said last week, Rahab was always mentioned, Rahab the prostitute. Not because, hey, remember who you are, but it's remember what he can do. It doesn't matter your reputation or your past. What Satan wants to create shame over, God will bring glory from. And so, her mother-in-law said to her, "Where did you gather barley today, and where did you work?" This was when the day was over. She went back home to Naomi, and she said, "May the Lord bless the man who noticed you," because she had said, maybe I can go find someone who I'll find favor with, who will let me gather. So Ruth told her mother-in-law, whom she had worked with, and said, "The name of the man I worked with today is Boaz." And Naomi's wheels started turning and said, "I know Boaz." And she said, "This man is a close relative to our family." And if you are familiar with Jewish law, he is a family or a kinsman redeemer. When the promised land was to be divided up, it was important to keep the land in clans. And so when someone died, a close relative would marry his widow, have children in his name, so that the land and the property would stay in his name in that family. And she said, "He is one of those men for us." And so then she went on to say, "Do what he said, stay." He said, he also told me, "Stay with my young man until they have finished all the harvest. You can keep coming back as long as there's a harvest." And remember, they just happened to arrive at the start of the barley harvest, so they were going to get maximum benefit. And Boaz wanted to make sure Ruth got as much grain as possible to take to Naomi. So Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, Ruth, "My daughter, it's good for you to work with these female servants, because it's a dangerous world out there. Stay with them so nothing will happen to you in another field." So Ruth stayed close to Boaz's female servants, gathered grain until the barley and wheat harvests were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law through all that time. And then Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, said to her, "My daughter, shouldn't I find rest for you so that you will be taken care of?" You see, when we're miserable, all we can think about is our misery. But if we can turn that attention outward and start thinking of other people, our outlook on everything changes. I remember what it was like waking up in ICU after cancer surgery. They'd cut out 40% of my tongue, replaced it with my wrist. It was miserable. And then they said, "It's time to walk. You need to walk." So I thought, I don't feel like walking, but if it'll make somebody happy, I'll walk. But then when I started walking, God put something in my heart to do. And what he did was, I couldn't talk. I could barely walk. I had all these bulbs and things hanging on me. I wanted to see how many people I could make smile. You see, when we start thinking of other people, what happens is we start forgetting about our misery. We stop feeling like an outcast whenever we have a mission or purpose or something to accomplish to benefit other people. And this is that moment for Naomi. She started thinking, instead of seeing Ruth as someone that she needed for her benefit, she started thinking how she needed to provide for Ruth. And she did it in the form of becoming a matchmaker. And that's why this became a love story. And that evening, she said, this evening, Boaz will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. That's when all the grain that was brought in, the edible grain and the chaff are separated. Wash yourself up, put on perfume oil, wear your best clothes, and you're going to go down to the threshing floor. But don't let the man know you're there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, notice the place where he's lying. Go in, uncover his feet, and lie down, and then he will explain to you what you should do. So Ruth said, I'll do everything you say. And then during the night, she did that. It was dark, and during the night, he realized there was someone at his feet. And he realized who it was. He said to her, may the Lord bless you, my daughter, for you have shown more kindness now than before, because you have not pursued younger men. But don't be afraid, for I will do for you whatever you say, since all the people in my town know that you are a woman of noble character. Some commentators here, they like to suspect that something went on, and something could have happened if it had not been for the character of Boaz and Ruth. And when we see how this story played out, there was no reason to think that anything shady occurred. And he says, everyone in my town knows that you're a woman of noble character. Yes, it is true. I am a kinsman redeemer. But he was a man of character. He knew there was one redeemer closer than him who had the rights of first refusal. He was a man of prominence, probably could have done what he wanted. Everyone in that day without a king was doing what they wanted to do. But he wanted to honor God. And so he said, there is someone that we need to give first rights of refusal to. But if he doesn't want to redeem you, I will. And insert there, I will marry you. And so she went home. Of course, Naomi was up all night, couldn't wait to hear the rest of the story. Any one of you who has kids that are teenagers or beyond, you know that kind of excitement and anticipation. What happened, my daughter? And Ruth told her everything that the man had done for her, and I can see Naomi smiling. And she said, my daughter, you won't have to wait long to find out how things turn out, because he's not going to rest until he resolves this issue. And it's going to be today, I promise you. And sure enough, that morning, first thing in the morning, Boaz went to the city gates where all the men gathered, and he was the first one there, and he waited. Soon the family redeemer that Boaz had spoken of came by. And he said to him, sit down, and he sat down. And then he gathered 10 of the town's elders, and he told them to sit here, and they sat there. And he said to the Redeemer, Naomi, who has returned from the territory of Moab, is selling the portion of the field that belonged to our brother Elimelech. I thought I should inform you, buy it back in the presence of those seated here and in the presence of the elders of the people. If you want to redeem it, do it. But if you don't want to redeem it, I will. And so the guy said, I want to redeem it. If there's land to buy, I want to buy it. And then Boaz said, oh, by the way, on the day that you buy the field from Naomi, you will also acquire Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of the deceased man, to perpetuate the name's man on his property, which is how kinsman redeemership worked. And he said, oh, that will dilute the wealth from my heirs. I can't do it. And Boaz said, I was hoping you'd see it that way. And he said to the elders and the witnesses, he said, you're witnesses today that I'm buying from Naomi everything that belonged to Elimelech, Chilion, and Mahlon. You see, the Redeemer was interested in it, but Boaz's interest was in who? Was in Ruth. And also notice that this is how Naomi was taken care of for the rest of her life. Everything that seemed to be woe is me and caused bitterness, God turned into blessing. And so Boaz took Ruth. She became his wife. She gave birth to a son. And that's when the outcast became the chosen one. And the women said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord who has not left you without a family redeemer. May his name become well known in Israel. He renewed your life and will sustain you in your old age. Indeed, your daughter-in-law, who loves you and is better for you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. You see, Mara, bitterness, was a label she assigned to herself, but it never stuck, did it? Why? Because it wasn't true. It's how she felt, but it wasn't true. And so God rewarded Ruth's faithfulness. He removed Naomi's bitterness, and he chose the outcast to become the great grandmother of King David. How did it happen? Well, Ruth's journey from outcast to chosen can become your journey too. When you choose God to be your God and his people to be your people. Ruth was a woman of uncompromised character who made 3 choices, regardless of where she was from and where she had belonged. She chose a different path. She said, your God will become my God. She chose a different people. Your people will become my people. And she chose a man of noble character. You see, uncompromising character will make seemingly little choices every day that will let you experience the closeness of God as he works through the choices you make. You make choices that honor him. He will reveal himself to you. Because when we're faithful, God is able to advance his story of redemption through us. And we come to communion. Communion is a time when we celebrate the redemption, Jesus buying us back from sin. He paid a price. There are 85 verses in the book of Ruth. The word redeemer, redeemed, shows up in 23 of them. The story shows that even when things appear bad, that God is in charge, and he shows up in what looks like in those times as accidents. Boaz was the kinsman redeemer of an outcast who had no family and no hope. But God had already worked when he called Rahab the prostitute to himself and brought her into his family and prepared the way for Ruth to enter too. And through her brought the ultimate kinsman redeemer, Jesus, who, because he was born a human being, in essence became our kinsman. And because he went to the cross without sin, he became our redeemer. It doesn't matter your race. It doesn't matter your record. It's all expunged. And not only is your record wiped clean, but the righteousness of God covers you. He makes you his righteousness through faith in Jesus, our Redeemer. For there's no difference. We've all sinned and we've fallen short of the glory of God, and we look to the one who has never sinned as our hope. For if you put your faith in the God of Israel, God will work through you and make you a part of his family. The family where the unloved becomes the loved, and the outcast becomes the chosen one. So let's take this moment to take the bread that shows that he's our kinsman, and take the juice of the blood of our Redeemer. For he is our hope, he is our righteousness, he is our King, now and forevermore. So glad you're able to join us today, whether you're in the room or online or out under the canopy. And if you have called on Jesus to become your Redeemer today, would you let us know by texting the name Jesus to this number so we can walk with you in your new life. As you leave today, if you want to find a way to become a part of this group of people, go to Next Steps. It's just right across the hall as you leave today. But I hope you have a great week, and I hope you can come back next week for week 3 of our series, Significant Nobodies. God bless you.